Libby Squire, a bright young woman, vanished into the freezing night. CCTV captured her final steps. Screams echoed near the woods, but by the time police arrived, she was gone. Weeks later, a decomposed body surfaced in the river, wearing a necklace with an L. What began as a missing person case soon unraveled into something far darker. This is the haunting story of Libby Squire. Stay with us. Hull, East Yorkshire in England, is home to the University of Hull, which serves approximately 14,000 students. Among them was 21-year-old Libby Squire, known to everyone as Libby. She was in her second year and thriving. Her academic work was strong. She enjoyed university life and had a close-knit circle of friends. Those who knew her described her as wickedly funny, intelligent, quick-witted, and inclusive. She adored her younger brother and sisters and had a deep bond with her parents, Lisa and Russell. Libby had always been highly driven and aimed for academic excellence, though her family noted she often set unattainably high expectations for herself. This intense pressure eventually impacted her mental health. She struggled with an eating disorder, self-harm, and declining grades. Still, she pushed forward, completed her A-levels, and was ecstatic when she was accepted into university to study philosophy. Lisa admitted she was anxious about her daughter being so far from home, fearing her mental health might worsen, but Libby insisted this change was necessary and was excited for a new beginning. She took a gap year before starting her studies, traveling to Paris, and by the time she returned, she was ready to embrace the next chapter. Libby was in a steady relationship with her boyfriend of 3 years, Connor, who described her as the most interesting, compassionate person he had ever known. He believed she was his future. University life had brought out new confidence in Libby, and she seemed happier than ever. Always occupied with something, Libby had already mapped out post-graduation plans. She wanted to travel with her housemates and pursue a career in journalism. According to Connor, university had helped Libby find her voice. She was confident, focused, and full of life. On the evening of the 31st of January, 2019, at 8:30 p.m., Libby left her student accommodation on Wellesley Avenue. She and a group of friends headed to another nearby student house. The area was busy, filled with students preparing for nights out. Their plan was simple: some pre-drinks, games, and then heading to a popular local nightclub known as the Welly. Around 10 p.m., Libby sent a goodnight message to Connor, letting him know she was leaving her phone behind at home. At 11:20 p.m., the group reached the club, captured by CCTV as they entered. However, Libby was denied entry. She appeared very drunk and unstable on her feet. Security staff refused her admission, stating she had clearly had too much to drink. After regrouping, her friends decided to send her home. 10 minutes later, they helped her into a taxi, paid the driver, and instructed him to drop her back at her place. They watched the cab leave before continuing their night. By nearly 3 a.m., her friends were returning home and beginning to wind down when they texted one of Libby's housemates, someone who had stayed in to check on her. To their shock, the reply came back saying Libby never made it back. They were immediately concerned. No one they contacted had seen her, and with her phone left behind, they couldn't reach her. Her house keys were later found lying in the garden, deepening their worry. Libby had been heavily intoxicated, and the night was bitterly cold, with snow on the roads. Everyone knew it was dangerous for her to be out alone. They called the police straight away. Officers responded quickly, and early theories considered whether she may have run off due to mental health issues. But this seemed unlikely. Libby had recently been in great spirits, adored her housemates, and had just received excellent feedback on her coursework. Just a few hours after Libby was last seen, the media had picked up the story, and her name was suddenly everywhere. A CCTV camera mounted on a nearby property agency captured footage outside the Welly nightclub, the usual spot where clubgoers would queue. The video showed Libby approaching the venue before being refused entry. Off camera, she was seen walking back to rejoin her friends. The business owner who released the footage to police hoped it might trigger someone's memory from that night. Police soon tracked down the taxi driver who had taken her home. He confirmed that he dropped her off on Wellesley Avenue, and as he looked in the mirror, he saw her walking toward the front door of her student housing. But for reasons unknown, she never actually entered the building. Thankfully, the streets were under consistent surveillance, and since they had the timestamp from when she was in the cab, officers were able to piece together her movements after getting out. CCTV footage showed Libby walking near her home around 11:37 p.m. 3 minutes later, at 11:40 p.m., two pedestrians found her lying in the snow. They stopped to help and described her as emotional and upset. She was crying, disoriented, and unresponsive to their attempts to assist, becoming agitated and incomprehensible. Believing there was nothing more they could do, they left. Not long afterward, a group of students spotted her outside their home and tried to invite her in to check on her well-being. But Libby continued walking, seemingly without direction or purpose. Authorities suggested that given the frigid conditions that night, it was likely she had begun to experience the early stages of hypothermia. As the investigation into her disappearance progressed, forensic teams from Humberside Police began working at the last location where Libby had been seen. They collected evidence and continued to appeal for information. Search operations intensified along the nearby River Hull with the assistance of the Coast Guard. University students also joined the efforts to locate her. Friends expressed disbelief, saying it felt surreal, like something out of a film. They remembered her as someone responsible, always ensuring she contacted someone no matter the situation. It was unlike Libby not to reach out. The silence since that night was deeply troubling, and everyone involved knew something wasn't right. At 11 p.m., Libby entered a taxi outside the Welly nightclub on Beverly Road. Police believe she exited near her home on Wellesley Avenue, just a few minutes away. But 45 minutes later, CCTV showed her again, this time at the junction with Haworth Street. A male driver saw her sitting alone on a bench, stopped to check if she was okay, and left when she reassured him that she was fine. What happened after that remains unknown. Police followed several leads and urged anyone who had been in the area between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. that night to come forward, particularly if they had dashcam footage that could help the investigation. While publicly treating it as a missing person case, investigators were reportedly already working behind the scenes on the basis that Libby may have been abducted. Her parents began making emotional public appeals, pleading for any sign that their daughter was safe. Her mother urged Libby to get in touch by any means possible, saying the entire family was devastated by her absence. Especially me, your dad, your sisters, and your brother. I miss you so much, it's breaking my heart. The response from the public was immediate and overwhelming. Search parties grew in size each day. Libby's name spread across social media and national news. The University of Hull coordinated with police to organize volunteer-led search efforts. Officers asked locals to search gardens, sheds, and outbuildings, anywhere Libby might have tried to seek shelter. They also reviewed bins, drains, and every possible hiding spot. Police released details about her clothing and circulated images from that night. Anyone captured on CCTV around the same time or near her last known location was asked to step forward and provide statements, no matter how insignificant the detail may have seemed. It had now become a national story and the largest investigation ever undertaken by Humberside Police. Libby's phone was thoroughly examined, but no clues were found, nothing to indicate that she had arranged to meet anyone or that foul play was certain. Detectives were left to rely heavily on CCTV footage to reconstruct her movements. As each hour passed with no contact, the urgency of the case deepened. It was the fourth day since her disappearance, and now specialists began focusing on the nearby water sources. Just a short distance from the street where Libby lived, police units combed every inch of ground, hoping for even the smallest piece of evidence. On the banks of the river, forensic divers entered the freezing water, while others searched the roadside. A mobile phone had been recovered earlier in the investigation, but it failed to yield any meaningful data about Libby's movements. Although her exact location remained unknown, police stressed that this didn't necessarily mean she had come to harm, but a full and thorough investigation was needed. Then came the first significant breakthrough. a resident living close to the Oaks Road playing fields contacted police. He had been awoken around 12:15 a.m. by a woman screaming in the wooded area nearby. The scream was loud enough to jolt him from sleep, and he remembered the time precisely because he had checked his phone. As he looked out the window, he saw a man walking briskly toward a car. It was the first tangible lead in days and gave police a very specific window to focus on. Investigators returned to the CCTV archive and began working backward from that moment. If the woman screaming had been Libby, then she must have crossed paths with her abductor between 11:30 p.m. and 12:15 a.m. It dramatically narrowed the search timeline. Then they noticed something. A silver Vauxhall Astra had been driving in loops around the area for nearly an hour before Libby disappeared. At one point, just before midnight, the car pulled over near the street where Libby had been seen. A man got out and crossed the road, seemingly following her. Libby was initially seen standing near a bus stop, but further footage revealed she was actually walking back in the direction of her home. A man crossed the road ahead of her, seemingly trying to determine if she was alone or accompanied. After pausing for a moment, he crossed back again and engaged with Libby. What followed next was a 5-minute window where the two were seen walking together, heading in the opposite direction from where Libby had originally been going. Shortly after, Libby remained on the pavement while the man returned to his vehicle, now parked nearby. As headlights from other cars passed by, he appeared to wait for the coast to clear before taking further action. At exactly 12:08 a.m., Libby was seen entering the vehicle. Her wristwatch was later recovered from that very spot, leading police to theorize there had been a struggle. Perhaps the driver forcibly pulled her into the car, or at least physically persuaded her to get inside. This moment was pivotal. If the car had been parked just slightly farther away, the footage might have failed to capture the critical exchange. Investigators now had a detailed image of the vehicle, a time window, and, based on local witness accounts, a sense of its destination. CCTV showed the silver car pulling into the Oak Road playing fields. Roughly 10 minutes passed. This coincided almost perfectly with the nearby resident reporting the sound of a woman screaming in the wooded area. Then, the vehicle's headlights illuminated, and it was seen exiting the fields and rejoining the main road. Around 3 a.m., 2 separate women reported a disturbing encounter with a man who stepped in front of them on the street and began masturbating. They were horrified, but the man showed no shame, appearing to enjoy their discomfort. Using their statements, along with the vehicle description and location, police identified the man. Everything matched the car, the time, and the behavior. A license plate search finally gave police a name. On the 6th of February, exactly 7 days after Libby vanished, police confirmed they had arrested a suspect in relation to her disappearance. Just 1 mile from where she was last seen, a 24-year-old man was taken into custody on suspicion of abduction. Forensic officers had arrived at his home the night before, and their investigation had escalated dramatically over the past 24 hours. Officers first knocked on the neighbor's door to secure the back garden, ensuring no escape route could be used. Just before midnight, police made their move and entered through the front. While officers continued scouring the surrounding fields and waterways, specialist marine units swept through local rivers. Investigators combed through the wooded areas adjacent to where Libby had last been spotted. Meanwhile, Hull's community. Students, staff, and residents held vigils, honoring Libby and praying for answers. A car, recovered from a quiet dead-end street, became a focal point. It had been parked there, just 20 paces from the road Libby was last seen on, for around 20 minutes, at precisely the time she disappeared. The man arrested was identified as 24-year-old Paweł Relowicz, a married father of 2 who worked as a butcher. Originally from Poland, Paweł had moved to the UK as a teenager and attended a local catering college. In addition to abduction, he was also arrested on suspicion of sexual offenses. To the outside world, he had seemed like a hardworking man often seen baking, going to the gym, and taking walks with his young children. Neighbors described him as warm, polite, and cheerful. But the truth was far more sinister. Police had just taken a dangerous predator off the streets. The quiet man next door was now linked to a series of disturbing crimes. His home stood only minutes from where Libby had last been spotted and dangerously close to the field where screams were reported that night. Once his fingerprints and DNA were taken, connections to several other unsolved incidents quickly emerged, shocking even the most seasoned investigators. Looking back nearly 2 years, police uncovered a disturbing pattern in Pavel's past. For a long time, he had been sneaking into people's homes, peering through windows, and watching couples during intimate moments. He frequently followed women in the streets, often exposing himself. On some occasions, he broke into houses, stole underwear, and left behind used condoms. One woman woke up one night to find him staring at her through a glass door. She alerted her housemates, who chased him off and tried to get a picture, but it wasn't clear enough to identify him. Another incident took place on the very street where Libby lived. Although fingerprints and DNA had been collected from several homes, they never matched anyone in the system until now. Suddenly, many of those unsolved crimes pointed directly to Pavel. Sources revealed that he had displayed deviant sexual behavior from a young age. By his own admission, he had an addiction to violent pornography and couldn't control his impulses. He would often lie to his wife, saying he was going out for a run, only to instead roam the streets searching for windows to look through or women to follow and expose himself to. 7 days had now passed since Libby's disappearance, and police were conducting a full search of Pavel's home and car. While his house didn't reveal much, the contents of his vehicle told a different story. Inside were dirty underwear, sex toys, used condoms, voyeuristic photos of women, and various stolen items. When questioned about Libby, he initially denied ever seeing her. But confronted with CCTV footage, he changed his story, claiming he had stopped to help her as a good Samaritan, offering to drive her home. He said he drove her to Oak Road playing fields and then left, later returning home to take a bath and watch pornography on his phone. While not a full confession, this placed him directly at the scene. Combined with a witness report of screams from that area, detectives became convinced this was no longer a missing persons case. Libby had almost certainly come to harm. Although they now had enough evidence to charge Pavel with 13 sexual offenses across different incidents, they were told they still didn't have the proof needed to connect him definitively to Libby's disappearance. 7 weeks after Libby Squire vanished, the case reached a tragic milestone. A fisherman discovered a severely decomposed body floating in the Humber estuary. The body wore a necklace bearing the initial L, which quickly raised alarms. Authorities confirmed it was Libby. The identification came as a devastating blow to her family and the wider community, who had held on to hope during the long weeks of searching. A post-mortem was launched immediately to determine how she had died. The investigation was reclassified as a murder inquiry. The University of Hull publicly expressed its condolences, and mourners began to gather at the last place Libby was seen. The forensic results confirmed that she had been sexually assaulted before her death. However, the advanced state of decomposition made it impossible to identify a definitive cause. The possibility remained that she had either died from asphyxiation or drowned, but conclusive evidence was lacking. Investigators believed her body had been disposed of in the River Hull and carried downstream to the Humber. This conclusion caused immense distress, especially for her mother Lisa. Libby had always been terrified of water and was a weak swimmer. The possibility that she had still been alive when she was pushed into the river haunted her family. It added a deeper layer of anguish to their grief, raising painful questions that could never be fully answered. After the murder classification became public knowledge, Lisa shared her pain with those following the case. She expressed the overwhelming sense of loss and regret felt by any parent who could not protect their child. Her message resonated across the nation, embodying the sorrow of a mother confronted with an unthinkable tragedy. The emotional weight of the case lingered, not only for Libby's family, but for all who had followed the desperate search for the young woman whose life was cut short. By August 2019, 7 months had passed since Libby first went missing. Pavel Relovich was due in court to face charges unrelated to her disappearance, which he initially denied. However, in a sudden change of direction, he pleaded guilty to 9 offenses in total. These included 4 counts of voyeurism, 2 counts of outraging public decency, and 3 counts of burglary, all committed between 2017 and 2019. He received a sentence of 8.5 years in prison, later reduced to just under 6 following a successful appeal. Authorities were relieved to have him in custody and no longer feared the possibility of him fleeing the country. Investigators pressed on, determined to build a solid case connecting him to Libby's disappearance. They sifted through thousands of hours of surveillance footage, trying to trace his actions the night Libby vanished. One crucial moment captured him returning to the same area around 2:30 a.m., roughly 2 hours after he had first been seen there with Libby. He remained in the area briefly before driving back into town, where he later exposed himself to 2 women. This sequence was the final piece investigators had been waiting for. He had no reason to revisit the scene unless it was to hide evidence or dispose of items. Shortly afterward, forensic tests that had been pending for months were returned, confirming Pavel's DNA on and inside Libby's body. Faced with this, Pavel altered his account once more. He now claimed that Libby had initiated sexual contact and that their encounter in the fields had been consensual before he left her there. However, detectives dismissed this version as another fabrication. With this new evidence in hand, police were finally ready to move forward and formally submit charges for rape and murder. In October 2019, nearly 300 people came together to attend the funeral of Libby Squire. It was a deeply emotional event, marking 7 painful months since her disappearance. Just 2 weeks later, the breakthrough everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. After extensive consultation with prosecutors, police announced that Pavel Relowitz had officially been charged with sexually assaulting and causing the death of Libby. As the charges were read to him in the back of a police car, relayed through a translator, he reportedly began to laugh, showing no signs of remorse or shock. His mother publicly defended him, insisting he was incapable of such violence and that he had always respected women. However, she also expressed deep sorrow for Libby's family and stated that if her son was indeed guilty, he should face the full extent of justice. Despite the mounting evidence, Pavel pleaded not guilty, standing by his claim that he and Libby had engaged in consensual sex and that he had then left her alive in the fields. After several delays due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the trial finally began in January 2021. Prosecutors painted a chilling portrait of Relowitz as a highly dangerous sexual predator whose escalating crimes had reached a deadly climax. They described how his need for control, dominance, and instilling fear drove him to commit sexual assault and ultimately take the victim's life. Libby had simply been the wrong person at the wrong time, vulnerable, emotional, and alone, exactly the kind of target he sought. The defense attempted to cast doubt on the timeline. They pointed out that if Pavel's car entered the playing fields at 12:11 a.m. and screams were heard at 12:14 a.m., with him driving away by 12:20, there was a very narrow window for such horrific events to occur. But the prosecution countered that it was entirely possible given Libby's vulnerable state and Pavel's physical advantage and intent. They also emphasized that they didn't need to prove every detail occurred in that exact window. CCTV footage, forensic evidence, and his return to the scene 2 hours later strongly indicated premeditation and concealment. Prosecutors argued that Relowitz had long been pushing boundaries, breaking into homes, stealing underwear, exposing himself because he could, and because he was getting away with it. The progression of his crimes had become bolder, more dangerous, and inevitably deadly. They insisted that the evidence, both physical and behavioral, clearly pointed to a predator who had finally acted out his darkest fantasies. After a complex and emotional 2-week trial, the jury began deliberations in the case of Libby Squire's murder. 5 days later, the verdict was announced. Pavel Relowitz was found guilty on both counts of rape and murder. Despite his consistent claims that the encounter had been consensual, the jury rejected his defense by a majority of 11-1. The decision brought an end to one of the most heartbreaking cases in recent years. Pavel was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 27 years before he could be considered for parole. During sentencing, the judge delivered a powerful statement saying that Libby had not stood a chance that night. He emphasized that even if Relowitz were eventually released in his early 50s, he would be monitored for the rest of his life. The judge called the case unimaginably harrowing and acknowledged the immense toll it had taken on all those involved. In a statement after the sentencing, Libby's parents expressed their gratitude for the love and support they had received over the past 2 years. They extended special thanks to the police and legal teams who had worked tirelessly from the very beginning. However, they also made it clear that justice would never restore their daughter or return their lives to normal. For them, there was no closure, only a recognition that the person responsible had been held accountable. Libby, they said, would always be remembered for her warmth, kindness, and the light she brought to their lives. Following his conviction, Relowitz's wife ended their relationship and returned to Poland with their children. She said she had been horrified by what had come to light, insisting that the man found guilty in court was not the husband she had known. To her, their life together had always seemed normal, and she had never suspected what he had been hiding. Libby Squire has remained committed to campaigning for stricter laws around non-contact sexual offenses, advocating for harsher penalties and systemic reform. She joined forces with police to launch a campaign encouraging the public to report so-called low-level sex offenses, stressing their potential to escalate. Lisa even secured a meeting with then-Prime Minister Boris Johnson, where she argued for whole-life tariffs to become automatic for convicted murderers. When Johnson told her that prison space was limited, she responded bluntly, "Build more." To Lisa, the matter was straightforward. If someone takes a life, they should never walk free again. Libby doesn't come back in 27 years, she said. We live a whole life sentence without her. In 2022, Lisa expressed a desire to meet with Pavel Relowitz in prison, not to forgive or understand him, but to learn what happened in the final minutes of her daughter's life. Surprisingly, Pavel agreed. Lisa explained that her wish was not rooted in hatred or a need for reconciliation, only in truth. She acknowledged that many people didn't understand her decision, but emphasized that her imagination often tortured her more than any detail he could possibly provide. She even called his initial agreement to meet brave and something she appreciated deeply. However, in February 2023, Pavel retracted his agreement. He claimed he no longer wanted to speak with Lisa because he felt the Squire family had contributed to his negative portrayal in the media. It was a cruel blow, especially given Lisa's dignity and grace throughout the ordeal. Ultimately, his refusal seemed like a final attempt to maintain control over the story, over the truth, and over the family's ongoing pain. Libby's family has continued to conduct themselves with extraordinary strength, focusing on advocacy, legal reform, and preserving Libby's memory. Lisa said that every morning, in that fleeting moment between sleep and waking, she forgets what has happened. Then reality crashes back in. Sometimes, even looking at photos she's seen 1,000 times, she's overwhelmed by a fresh wave of grief. She's haunted by a single question. Why did someone take away such a bright, kind, and loving human being? Libby Squire's story is a haunting reminder that evil often hides in plain sight. Her bright future was stolen, but her family's courage and fight for justice keep her memory alive. May her legacy spark change and protect others from the same fate. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and explore more true crime stories we've uncovered. Thank you for watching.